in communist China. In short, a nation of 1.2 billion people, 1/5 of the entire human population, is essentially ruled by 6 men. If 6 men can rule more than a billion, why is it so difficult to believe that a relative handful of men employing conspiratorial methods and acting through political channels could effectively rule the world? Once again, if common criminals can create a single underworld government, why can't political criminals create a single world government? We should also remember St. Augustine's warning: either governments serve the ends of justice or they become vast criminal enterprises. The framers of the U.S. Constitution were aware of the essentially criminal nature of most rulers, and this understanding is the foundation of America's political system. In a speech to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Benjamin Franklin warned that all history informs us that there has been in every government and kingdom a constant kind of warfare between the governing and the governed. There is scarce a ruler in 100 who would not, if he could, get first all the people's money, then all their lands, and then make them and their children servants forever. Furthermore, as Madison wrote, government is the greatest of all reflections on human nature. Being firmly rooted in a biblical understanding of man's fallen nature and having a detailed knowledge of political history, the Founding Fathers created a system in which both the government and the citizens would be ruled by law. To paraphrase Thomas Jefferson, the founders sought to bind their new government down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Suspicion of government is not paranoia or extremism. It is what Madison described as the prudent jealousy regarding our liberty that is part of the duty of every American. The foresight of America's Founding Fathers can be seen in the tragedies that have enveloped our world in this century, the century of unlimited government. Political scientist R.J. Rummel has documented in his book Death by Government that during the first 9 decades of the 20th century, at least 170 million people, and perhaps as many as 360 million, have been killed by governments. It is as though our species has been devastated by a modern black plague, writes Rummel. And indeed it has, but it has been a plague of power, not germs. Rummel points out that although the common and fundamental justification of government is that it exists to protect citizens against the anarchic jungle that would otherwise threaten their lives and property, a preeminent fact about government is that some of them murder millions in cold blood. This is where absolute power reigns. The desire for absolute power inspired Nazi and communist conspirators, and it is that same illicit desire that motivates those who seek to create a world government. For decades, the John Birch Society has warned of the existence of an international power elite that seeks to abolish the independence of all nations, including the United States, in order to create a world government that would be socialist in nature. That power elite consists of banking, political, and academic leaders, as well as revolutionary socialists, and it is united by a common desire to control the world's wealth and regiment the lives of mankind. One of the most compelling testimonies of the existence of that elite was provided more than 30 years ago by celebrated historian Carroll Quigley, who was President Bill Clinton's academic mentor at Georgetown University. In his voluminous work, Tragedy and Hope, The History of the World in Our Time, Quigley declared, "There does exist and has existed for a generation an international Anglophile network which operates, to some extent, in the way the radical right believes the communists act. In fact, this network has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other groups, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records." Perhaps the most recognizable symbol of that elite is David Rockefeller. According to journalist Bill Moyers, Rockefeller is the unelected if indisputable chairman of the American establishment. Rockefeller sits at the hub of a vast network of financiers, industrialists, and politicians whose reach encircles the globe. What some critics see as a vast international conspiracy, he considers a circumstance of life, just another day's work. Carroll Quigley pointed out that the ruling elite, quote, has no aversion to cooperating with communists, end quote. This is certainly true of David Rockefeller. After returning from a visit to communist China in 1973, Rockefeller expressed these sentiments in a column published by the New York Times. Whatever the price of the Chinese Revolution, it has obviously succeeded not only in producing more efficient and dedicated administration, but also in fostering high morale and community of purpose. The social experiment in China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. It should be remembered that the social experiment that so enchanted Mr. Rockefeller resulted in the extermination of at least 30 million human beings. When Cuban dictator Fidel Castro was unable to obtain a visa in order to attend the 50th anniversary of the United Nations in 1995, David Rockefeller personally intervened. The communist autocrat visited New York as a personal guest of the chairman of the American establishment, and during his visit, Castro attended both a communist rally at Harlem's Abyssinian Baptist Church and a closed-door meeting with business and media elites at the Park Avenue headquarters of the Council on Foreign Relations. The Council on Foreign Relations, or CFR, is the American affiliate of the international network identified by Carroll Quigley. It is an organization of some 3,300 members, drawn from government, finance, foundations, academia, and the media. Richard Harwood of the Washington Post noted in 1993 that the CFR is, quote, the nearest thing we have to a ruling establishment in the United States, end quote. The October 7, 1996 issue of New York Magazine explains that the council grew out of the Inquiry, a secretive group of well-educated bankers and lawyers who accompanied Woodrow Wilson to the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. The council saw as its mandate the calling of signals from the sidelines. The elites govern, while the lowly men of elective office dirty their hands with politics. The international institutions conceived in 1945, the UN, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, were anticipated in studies done at the council. In a 1989 book entitled Our Own Worst Enemy, former CFR President Leslie Gelb and CFR member Anthony Lake admitted that the deliberations of the CFR display all the earmarks of a conspiracy, a few hundred Wall Street bankers, lawyers, foundation executives, and businessmen meeting to arrange the deals far from the prying eye of the public and their elected officials. The primary creator of the CFR was Edward Mandell House, a college dropout from Texas who eventually became an intimate advisor to President Woodrow Wilson. So intimate, in fact, that Wilson described the austere Texan as my second self and maintained that his thoughts and mine are one. House was both a committed socialist and a frontman for the powerful banking interests that created America's Federal Reserve System. He was intimately involved in many of the Wilson administration's most radical initiatives, from America's entry into World War I to its support for the revolutionaries that created the Soviet state in Russia. He was also the chief author of the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations Covenant, the framework for a new world order. According to biographer Arthur D.H. Smith, House believed that the Constitution, a product of 18th century minds, was thoroughly outdated, that the country would be better off if the Constitution could be scrapped and rewritten. He also shared with Wilson the dream of modeling civilization anew and making his country the balance wheel of a new world order. In 1912, House published a political tract entitled Philip Drew, Administrator, which laid out the essence of his political faith. His ambition, he wrote, was to establish socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx, enhanced with a spiritual leavening. Philip Drew envisioned the creation of a world government body called the League of Nations. House's book predicted the triumph of world socialism through an alliance of revolutionary communists and wealthy monopoly capitalists. Philip Drew predicted that the League of Nations would be begotten by war, which was precisely the strategy employed by House and his comrades during World War I. In April 1917, just days after America was drawn into that world war, commentator Walter Lippmann, a protege of House who became a member of the secretive Inquiry Group, pointed out that the war was being waged for a secret purpose. What is being arranged in Washington these days is really a gigantic experiment in internationalism. We are witnessing the creation of a supranational control of the world's necessities. The old notions of sovereignty no longer govern the facts. We have entered upon another phase of political unification, a phase greater in its consequences, but similar in its methods to the formation of national states in the 19th century. This is the birth of the League of Nations. But House and his co-conspirators suffered a critical setback. In 1919, the U.S.